The Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience. Today, talking some football with Jake Ciely from theathletic.com. But before we get to that, I want to let everyone know to smash the like button for the video. Leave your DraftKings handle in the comment section and tell me where you would rank David Johnson, now a member of the Houston Texans, in your season-long running back rankings. I'll talk to Jake about that in just a second. Also, if you want to get into a draw for 100 DraftKings dollars, better stockpile these DraftKings dollars for the time when sports come back, and boom, you can start entering these big contests. But subscribe to the Pat Mayo Experience audio podcast, leave a 5-star review, DraftKings handle, something you like about the show, and boom, you're in that draw for 100 DK dollars. Quick update for the shows going on, and listen, sometimes they're going to be releasing shows 2 in one day. Maybe, there'll be 3 over the course of 3 days, but 2 might come out in one day. If you see one there that you haven't done yet, go and download that. Remember to tell a friend about the show, because today we're doing football. Tomorrow it might be movies. It looks like Cage Warriors is still going on, so we might have to get Cody in here to talk about the Cage Warriors, something we can actually bet on. Cuss Corner came out on Monday. We got challenge recaps and reviews, so there's something for everyone. So tell a friend about the Pat Mayo Experience. Great way to kill some time. I'm not going to lie to you. And frankly, it seems like a lot of us had a lot of time on the go right now. UFC has shut down its doors until March 31st. They are saying that UFC 249, April 18th in New York City, is still tentatively scheduled to go. But I'm going to guess that they're going to try to find another location for that one. I don't think that's going to go down. I know we did a show on Sunday, if you go back and listen to it, about the different possibilities that the UFC is going to try to do to keep the doors open. Clearly, they've decided until March 31st that nothing is going to happen, which is likely the right move right now, especially with no more gatherings of 50-plus people. It's not a super good look. But they're going to try to get back into this as quickly as possible. There's bets out there whether you can say that the NBA or MLB or hockey is going to be the first sport back. The first sport back is likely going to be the UFC as of right now. So we'll see how that ends up going. Anyway, we got a ton of football to talk about. If there is a signing that you do not hear right now that has happened, it is likely because it has happened after Jake Ciely and I have spoken. So we got time here. We'll just record another show tomorrow and talk about the rest of it. But Jake, what's going on, my man?
Yeah, it's something to keep our minds off the craziness. And I have the free agent tracker. If people want to go check it out, The Athletic, I'm updating them as it comes, and which we'll get to. Yeah, somebody ever came after me like, how is David Johnson good for the team when they get rid of DeAndre Hopkins? They're like, well, I mean, I'm doing this as it happens. Like, breathe 5 seconds. Let me update it. So it is being updated over there. I'll have my podcast tomorrow. We could probably get back and do another show. So yeah, as you said, if you're watching, things might have happened by the minute. That's why for the reflection behind me that everybody sees, I have the TV on just in case.
Yeah, I got Twitter open in front of me, so anything that happens during the course of the show, we can real-time react to. But there's some major stuff going on right now, so let's get into the big one of the day. I was gonna joke and say it was like Jack Conklin signing with the Browns, but we'll get to that a little bit later on. So the Cardinals franchise Kenyon Drake. Then they trade David Johnson to the Texans for DeAndre Hopkins. And there's like other picks going on here. So it's DeAndre Hopkins and a 4th-round pick in exchange for David Johnson and a 2nd-round pick. So,
and a 4th rounder next year.
And a 4th round. Yeah, sorry about that. I mean, big deal.
No,
They really padded the back end of that. But
well, I joked about it before because the only reason I know is because I was doing the whole joking thing, like the Arizona Cardinals came to them and were like, hey, let's make this deal. And Bill O'Brien was like, no, let me give you more. Let me throw in DeAndre Hopkins.
So I'm trying to think, like, did they want to, is this like some like deep state stuff here that, they got to Bill O'Brien's like, Bill, you could really help us out here by making a deal that everyone can kind of rally behind. Because I have not seen one positive sign yet for people like, who this was a good trade for? The Houston Texans. Because, like, the cap hit for David Johnson next year is more than it is for DeAndre Hopkins. Like, this deal is ludicrous.
It is, but the entire argument, and I put that in quotes, that's coming out of Texans camp, and the whole reason behind it is because they have the other deals coming up, including Deshaun Watson, that they're going to need to make. And on top of it is the fact that Hopkins still had 3 years left, but he wasn't happy with those 3 years, and that he was going to demand that he reworks and get a new deal himself. And that maybe it didn't happen this year, but it was going to start to get to a head, and they were going to have to give him a contract. And well, with Deshaun Watson, all this stuff, it was supposedly forward thinking, which you brought up. Part of the point was, okay, that all makes sense. But then you throw in the fact it's not just David Johnson's contract. They're taking 100% of David Johnson's contract. And I understand a lot of guaranteed money is out after this year, but still, I don't know. Even everything I just said, I still don't know anybody who can actually sit there, make all those arguments and still say, yeah, it was a good trade for the Texans. Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, it's the third running back they've traded for in 12 months, or probably less than that right now. So I actually joked about it, but maybe Bill O'Brien is like trying to work some like dark magic here where in our fantasy league, we have a guy he's a friend of ours. He's an absolute moron. Very low IQ. Let's put it that way. So in the past, he's traded for Ricky Williams, who was on the Colts. So fake Ricky Williams. And remember fake Steven Jackson on the Kansas City Chiefs from like 3 years ago? We put him up like third in our auction, and he paid $53 for him. So Bill O'Brien is either thinking like, hey, now that I have David Johnson and Duke Johnson, if I just try to trade someone D Johnson, maybe they'll give me a bunch for them. But the problem is like, if it's any NFL GM who's going to do that, Bill O'Brien would be the guy to trade for the fake version of the real player.
Yeah, like Jose Reyes in baseball. There was another one with the Jose Reyes, which people used to throw out auctions to get that happen too. Is this I said somebody put that in my comments too. Like I know Jake hates, like I'm the only person out there that hates vetoes, but I know Jake hates vetoes, but this is the perfect example of the guy in your league that has no idea what he's doing and blah, blah, blah. And then you can't veto the trade because you can't have vetoes. Like, well, you know what? He's stupid as hell. Good for the Cardinals for taking advantage of him. You know what? For the other 30 teams that didn't try to get Bill O'Brien on the line, well, then you're an idiot. You should have tried.
All GMs should just have Bill O'Brien on speed dial. As it turns out, maybe being the coach and GM of a football team, it might be a bit too much for people. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Hey, I'm with you. I mean, honestly, forget speed dial. Wouldn't you just have like a weekly, like, or not even a weekly, a nightly chat? Like just text them every single night. Yeah,
just every night you just send a quick "you up" to Bill O'Brien and move on from there.
Yeah, and that would even be better. Do it at like 1 o'clock in the morning when things are even sketchier.
So we're kind of kicking the shit out of Bill O'Brien and the Texans because of this trade. But fantasy-wise, this does open up a pretty good door for David Johnson, although he's behind one of the most inept offensive lines in football because, as it turns out that, you can't just fix your offensive line problems with one guy. And that it's not really going to work out all that well. But David Johnson, fantasy-wise, let's start with him. So what is the fallout from this? I assume he's going to be the starter, even over Carlos Hyde. And as much as we want to give them crap for it, like they went out and they got Carlos Hyde, everyone kind of laughed at it. But like Carlos Hyde was relatively fantasy viable last year. He was like a running back 2 on the lower end. So that's not the end of the world. There were weeks where Duke Johnson was pretty viable on your fantasy team. If David Johnson's going to be the guy, and this isn't even, I assume that they're not going to bring back Lamar Miller at this point. What do we do with David Johnson fantasy wise? Like in the pantheon of the top 10 running backs, does he crack that? Or is Drake a more valuable commodity? Because I think it might be Drake.
I think that as of today, you would say Drake. Obviously, unless they, this will be telling what they think of Drake. It's a transition tag, so they're obviously bringing him back. I think that it's doubtful anybody gives Drake a big enough offer that makes the Cardinals go, oh well, never mind. That's why we did the transition tag. But so Drake's back. Chase Edmonds is still there. If they if they come out of the draft and add another significant piece, like 4th, 5th round, and that's why I even say 4th or 5th round because of this draft, or they pick up somebody that's out there, like I'm not saying Jordan Howard makes sense. I'm just saying like if they did something like that, that would tell us, well, we're just going right back to the same situation we've been dealing with the Cardinals last year. Now, if they go ahead as we expect and do very little, undrafted free agent 7th round, some type of flyer here or there, then it looks good for Drake, and it certainly looks better. As on what we know today. What we know today, Drake looked great. Drake looked great as the leader with David Johnson still there. We assumed he was going to be the leader even with David Johnson. But we also know that David Johnson does have top 5 potential. I don't know that he's that guy anymore. That's the biggest problem is that he looked last year slow. We joked about it watching film at times and saying like the guy looks like he's walking. Maybe all this time off, a full season plus is going to give him time to get 100%. And if he's even 90%, of what David Johnson used to be, he's better than Drake. But I don't even know if he's that. And if you go into this situation, like Duke Johnson, he's going to stay being Duke Johnson. You joked about another person they traded for. Is you look at that situation, Duke Johnson's Duke Johnson. I don't think they ever wanted him to be more than what he is. But David Johnson at a full and half point PPR with Deshaun Watson, with all this opportunity here, the offensive line, it looks like they're still trying to address that this offseason too, and part of the reason why they wanted to shed some of that money. Whatever it might be, David Johnson has top 10 potential. I think you draft Drake before you draft David Johnson, but you draft David Johnson as an RB3, hoping he can maybe get you top 15 return value as a running back.
I don't know if people are going to draft David Johnson as a running back 3. I think they'll still be enamored with the name David Johnson. Now, there's going to be a lot of scorned lovers out there who drafted David Johnson at number 5 or potentially even number 1 a year ago, because that was out there for some people. It didn't go very well. And usually when that happens, it was almost like the Todd Gurley from a few years ago when everyone drafted him super highly. He sucked, and then he fell to like the 3rd round the next year, and then he was the best running back in football, or at least in fantasy. That I still don't think that I would see the David Johnson path for that, like late 2nd round, early 3rd round in a 12-team league. And then I don't even know if I would really want him, to tell you the truth, at that price. That feels like about where he should go. And I would want him later, so I'd probably pass on him.
See, I'm factoring a lot of the draft too.
You can't, but we can't really do that at this point, though. That's hard to do.
No, but we honestly can, because look, I'll tell you this, and this is why we can, because the big 3 we've talked about before, we talked about on the other show, even if those big 3, one of them falls into a terrible situation, one of the next 3 or 4 behind them is going to fall into a situation the other way. And, you can go back to, we'll just give an example of last year's Miles Sanders, a good one. We can go back to Kareem Hunt when he was drafted and Spencer Ware got hurt. Now, granted, we had to wait for an injury for that one. We had to wait for the second half of the season for Miles Sanders. I bring it up because I'm saying, like, even if one of those situations happens, I'm only drafting David Johnson as an RB3. I know that you're saying it's probably not going to go that far, so don't be that guy. Let him go to somebody else. Wait, take one of the rookies, possibly in a timeshare. Wait, possibly take somebody else out there that could be like in a Miles Sanders situation, and don't pay that price. And that's my point. It's like, we can say that in the fact that don't be that guy to draft David Johnson, because even if he looks good in training camp, there's just so much risk there. There's also risk that, hey, as great as a pass catcher that he is, that they have Duke Johnson and don't use him enough to where he gets 80 receptions or 70 receptions.
And with Deshaun Watson, we've noticed this a lot, that quarterback, I wouldn't call Deshaun Watson a running quarterback, but he is mobile in the sense that if stuff isn't going on downfield, he seems far more likely to take off and run rather than just dump it off like a lot of quarterbacks will. So they just don't pass to their running backs all that much.
Yeah, and that's another factor too, is we saw that a lot with the split. We saw even when Duke Johnson was getting decent touch, like into the mid-teens and stuff like that. It's just not consistent back there. It's almost kind of like it's Cam Newton. And that, granted, I would say Cam Newton more rushing upside in his prime than Deshaun Watson, but similarly situations where they call their own number, they do take off running, they don't pass a lot to the running back out of the backfield. Christian McCaffrey changed things a little bit for Cam Newton because there's only so much you could do to ignore him. And now you see a lot of Christian McCaffrey without Cam Newton, but that was always the things we talked about with Cam Newton, is that, well, he doesn't pass enough to the running back. So there's that kind of ceiling there. And I think that's the part of all that being said. The biggest takeaway you have here is if you can get David Johnson's RB3, that's when I'll buy in. But as you said, I don't think I'll end up with a lot of David Johnson because I think he'll be gone by then.
Yeah. So I guess the projection that we're kind of putting on him versus where he's actually going to go is probably the conversation that we're probably going to have, for the next 6 months at this point. But with Drake, top 10 running back?
No, I wouldn't put him that high.
As it would stand right now, let's say they don't draft anyone, and it's just him and Chase Edmonds. Sounds pretty good.
I still wouldn't put him that high. I would put him probably in the RB2 discussion, probably like the 15 range. I'm not falling off that much. I know what we're talking about here, but I really do think there's going to be at least one, if not two, running backs that falls into a Josh Jacobs type situation, and I would take that, as we just saw with Josh Jacobs. And heck, we could talk about Josh Jacobs this year. I would draft Josh Jacobs before I drafted Kenyon Drake. I just think that putting Drake inside the top 10, I mean, who are you putting behind him to move him up that high? I think 15 is a fair number. It sounds nitpicky for 5 spots. I just don't think he's a guaranteed RB1 top 10.
All right, let's switch to the receiving scenarios now. So DeAndre Hopkins, let's speak to him first. Now on the Cardinals, he's the number 1. So Larry Fitzgerald is coming back. They have Christian Kirk. Andy Isabella still there. My main man, Damiere Byrd. Coco Beware, the Birdman. He's probably not looking so hot right now. Who was the other guy that they had that I always played at like $3,000 on DraftKings? It never worked.
The other Keyshawn Johnson?
The other Keyshawn Johnson. That's right. It's like, oh, he played 95% of the snaps. This is going to be his week. It's like, oh, he played 1% of the snaps this week. But the Cardinals under Cliff Kingsbury played this super accelerated offense, plays per second, through the roof, 4 wide receiver sets, very limited contributions from the tight ends because when Charles Clay is your tight end, why would you throw to your tight ends? They did get someone at the end of the year. Dan Arnold. Dan Arnold ended up on their team.
You didn't even need him. They basically drafted a tight end and Hakeem Butler.
And that
So
didn't.
there you go.
And he'll be back for next year, won't he?
Yeah, well, yeah, it was only his second year. The other one was Trent Sherfield. I think he's still on the team too. They have like 7,000 wide receivers.
I would say that Hopkins likely to be the number 1 guy in Arizona. Now,
Probably.
So with Kyler, I don't think will he be as good as he was with the Texans? Let's just throw it out there right now. I would
Hopkins?
say no.
I would say yes, because here's the deal: is Hopkins is coming off a down season for Hopkins, and if you look at the difference between what Deshaun Watson and Kyler Murray did last year, it's mostly touchdowns, and the yards were actually pretty similar. So Kyler Murray in his rookie season, who has the arm to throw downfield, that's one of the things that we never had to worry about with the height. Is it was more the concern with the height was the 5 to 15 yard range. So if he can get the ball downfield, he can get it over top. He has the arm. He can hit Hopkins. I think Hopkins' value stays. I think Hopkins' value stays more similar to last year than his peak season, but we're still talking top 3, top 5 at worst. I'm not concerned about Hopkins at all. And I mean, to go right to Kyler Murray, I think Kyler Murray's locked into this. You want to talk about betting on the side, if you can still do that anywhere, Pat? You throw a little dollar, well, not a dollar, but a couple dollars on Kyler Murray for the MVP. I think that's a worthy bet right now.
Let's see what that is at the moment. I can bring up the odds for MVP. Murray, 25-1. He was down from like 100-1. He's now 25-1.
I'll see it moved fast.
he now has the same odds as Jimmy G, Matt Ryan, and Tom Brady.
I would take him over all 3 of those.
I would too, but Patrick Mahomes at plus 350 is going to be tough to beat if he plays the entire year.
It really is, honestly. That's so I was thinking more of the 100-1.
Also, locking my money into betting futures with no sports going on at the moment, probably not the wisest investment.
Well, I think of all the sports, the big 4, quote unquote, I think that you would say football's okay, right? I mean, it's MVP too. You're not taking over-unders on seasons.
No, that's true. But I mean, but it's still the same kind of deal. Like if I bet Kyler Murray to win MVP right now, I can't theoretically cash that out until next January, even so.
Yeah, still fair. Yeah, I mean, if the odds were there, but the odds aren't there anymore.
So Hopkins, I don't think that he'll have the same sort of consistency that he had in Houston, just because I think there are so many options. And not to say that he won't be the number 1 option, but I can see games getting away from Hopkins where that never really, it happened from time to time with Houston over the past few years where like Hopkins laid a dud, but generally speaking, like you could just pencil in 10 targets, you could pencil in at least 5 catches. The yardage was kind of wonky, like a yo-yo, but the touchdowns would be there as well. When it comes to Murray and throwing to DeAndre Hopkins in Arizona, like, they were able to effectively run the ball last year behind an offensive line that wasn't very good. Like, you're going to have games where Drake kind of goes nuts and maybe he gets left aside. That never happened with the Texans. That was the one saving grace to the Texans receivers, that even though Carlos Hyde was like pretty good, it's not like he was taking over games where, we just don't need to throw anymore. It just never happened. So Hopkins could always get his, but where this system is set up, where, if it's one long shot to Andy Isabella, drive over, 90-yard touchdown. Now Hopkins isn't doing anything. I think there's more of that. I would still have him as a top 5 guy for sure. I'd have to really think about where I would want him amongst like Devontae Adams and Julio Jones and all of the other top tier wide receivers, and Michael Thomas. He's very much in that mix. I just don't know if he would still be like number 3 for me. He might now be like number 5 or number 6 for me. When we finally do rankings, I'll sort this out.
Yeah, I'm still okay with it, mostly because it's a 1-game difference, but a 1-game difference still doesn't make up for 50 more attempts for Kyler Murray. And again, Kyler Murray as a rookie. Kyler Murray as a rookie who is dealing with Larry Fitzgerald, a banged-up Christian Kirk, and all those options you mentioned before, with half of them being rookies. So I get your point. I think I just have a little more confidence in Kyler Murray, and the target's still going to DeAndre Hopkins. Maybe it's not 150, maybe it's 140. I don't think it's going to be that big of a drop-off.
The only cold water I would throw in that situation is that the Cardinals weren't very good last year, so they were constantly playing from behind. I would think that But when you play such a high pace offense like that and you're down in games, you can put up some trashy numbers just a little bit. Now, I think that could even out because if they're going to be better, that theoretically means they're probably going to be scoring more points anyway, just earlier in games. It could all just be a wash, but that would be my one. Like, I think there's a few points of hesitation on Hopkins being like the number one receiver. I'd just be a bit more pensive than that.
So who would you definitively? Hey, we could do it right now, like just for fun. Who would you definitively put in front of him? I mean, Michael Thomas, obviously, but then who else to knock him out of like the top three?
Adams, I would take over him right now.
Okay.
Probably Julio.
I wouldn't take Julio.
I mean, if we're just talking about consistency, like Julio is like the more consistent DeAndre Hopkins.
I don't think they'll be too dissimilar next year. I would take Hopkins.
I think they're in the same bucket. I think I'd still go with Julio. Who are the other guys that are good?
I mean, we could say, well, we say Chris Godwin, but I mean, Chris Godwin might have Tom Brady. So
I would, even whether it's Godwin, whether it's Mike Evans, and whichever one that people prefer, I would take Hopkins over them. Let me just I forget who we talked about like 3 weeks ago. My brain is just mush at this point, just churning out shows. I know that there's like top end receivers that I'm missing here.
Cooper Kupp finished in front of him.
I would not take Cooper Kupp. I would take Hopkins.
Kenny
Galladay. If Stafford sticks, maybe. I gotta stop touching my fucking face. Kenny Galladay, maybe.
You need this. This is what you need. Sit next to your desk.
You just spray it on my face?
No, but you're supposed to. That's one of the things. If worst comes to worst, you can put it on your hands and then rub your face with it.
Yeah, I wash my hands directly before starting this, but now I've touched a pen. Now I've touched my computer. I did wipe those down earlier, but just I want to make a habit to stop touching my face so much to think. I'm not the thinker, so yeah, maybe he's number 4. Like those 3, I would take over him. I gotta go look at this.
I mean, you're not doing Devontae Parker.
No, I'm not doing Devontae Parker. That's true.
Okay, Cooper Kupp finished in front of him.
No, not
okay.
Cooper Kupp.
Then who else are you going to put in front of him at this point?
It would be those 3, so I guess I'd have him number 4. I'm just trying to rack my brain to maybe Tyreek Hill.
Sure. No. I think I would go with Hopkins definitely.
I don't know if definitely with that.
Yeah.
That would be kind of the turn for me. I think those would be the top 5, the guys that we mentioned. So yeah, Hopkins at 4 then. So yeah, no real big difference.
So I have Hopkins at 3. He's still on the side. Yeah. So
Sure.
We're nitpicking 3 and 4.
Well, I think the thing is I had him at number 1 going into last year.
Okay.
And this year I would have him at number 4. Like the way that I see his situation is slightly less than I saw it last year. Obviously I was wrong last year, so take it with a grain of salt. But Kyler, where would we put him, do you think, amongst quarterbacks? Top 5?
Oh yeah, and that's what was in my write-up. You look at the fact that he finished 9th last year, maybe 8th, depending on some of the leagues that you're in. With that rushing floor, the rushing upside to potentially even run a little bit more, as you mentioned. Like maybe this offense is a little bit better. Maybe he scores a few more times. Anyway, rushing floor being the rushing floor of what it is. Kyler Murray last year, essentially Deshaun Watson with less touchdowns. Or fewer touchdowns. Sorry for your grammar
How
police out there.
dare you? The
Yeah,
entire comment section is like, Jake doesn't even know English.
Yeah, so I do English good. Or what is it? Or what was the thing that he said on The Simpsons? The kid?
Me fail English. That's impossible.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, there you go. So look, Kyler Murray, and this is what I wrote up in the Kyler Murray, you give him 5 touchdowns, 5 passing touchdowns more. And, okay, that sounds like it might be a lot to ask him. He only threw for 20, but again, he's a rookie. Well, let's compare it to Lamar Jackson. These kids can get better as passers, and Lamar Jackson, everybody was writing the book on him. And I'm like, oh, he's going to be a terrible passer for his entire career. You give him 5 more, and I'm just using 5 because you know where that puts him? At QB 5 last year. If he just has 5 more touchdowns, it's not that much more to ask. And that's 25. If you told me Kyler Murray threw for 30 next year, I wouldn't be surprised at all. So I think, like, if you talk Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, I mean, after that, excuse me, like a little throat there, though. Getting the corona. Who else are we talking about? Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson. Like, actually, there's a good one. Would you take Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, Kyler Murray? I think that he's in the conversation with those 2.
So we kind of agree that Lamar and Mahomes are 1-2, right?
Yes.
Like they're in a class by themselves. So yeah, I think that would be the next year. Like Wilson, Murray, depending on where Winston goes, like I think that Winston's a viable option to be up in this mix as well. Dak, I think, still is a part of this mix.
Yeah, Dak actually finished 2 or 3 last year.
Yeah. So I know I could see taking him at 3. I could see taking him at 4. I could see taking him at 5. I think I would probably prefer him to Watson, to tell you the truth. Wilson's a bit tougher for me. I really have to rack my mind around that.
Yeah, we'll have to see what the Seahawks do, if anything. To Lockett and DK Metcalf sounds fine, and they have 17 tight ends now. So, maybe Wilson's just being Wilson. And he's Wilson feels like the safer pick. Kyler Murray feels like, all right, do you want to potentially go for the guy that finishes number 2? By the way, don't forget Case Keenum now the backup with the Browns.
We'll get to it. I just saw that break. We'll get to that here in a second. I like what the Browns.
Who wants to talk? Who cares about that?
I think it's interesting that if it just seems like let's talk about it right now then. Case Keenum. And just
I don't care.
Everything that the Browns did. Let's put it that way. So the Browns go out and pay Austin Hooper $44 million on a 4-year contract.
Right.
They signed Jack Conklin, and I mean, I think everyone remembers that Rams game because it was on a Monday night or Sunday night. Can't remember now. But everyone remembers the game where Baker was dropping back and Aaron Donald was just in his face and he couldn't do anything, and he looked like I wouldn't even say an XFL QB, like not even a CFL QB. Like apparently there's some league called like the Indoor Football League, not the Arena League, the Indoor League. It looks like he should use like a quarterback from that league. So that wasn't good. Giving him some protection is good, but this seems like a hedge against Baker not being good. At least either bringing competition for him. It's a lot like what the rumors are floating around with the Bears are trying to do with Trubisky right now. Whether it's Dalton, it seems like they're out on Bridgewater at this point in time as we speak, that creating competition is a good thing. Try to push Baker. But if Baker sucks, he'll get the yank for Keenum. I'm sure of it.
See, I completely disagree. I think they're 100% in on Baker Mayfield. I think a lot of it's getting, the blame is where it's going to go. And that's because Kitchens couldn't run a team. They threw him from where he was to offensive coordinator, which looked good initially, and then offensive coordinator straight to head coach, and just skipped all these processes of seeing like how good he can handle each spot. And he was a lot of what was wrong last year. I told you on your show that something D'Angelo Williams said on the show when I was doing it with him, is that he knows 100% what's wrong with Baker and his connection to Odell Beckham. It's practicing. It's what you're teaching these kids in practice. And I say kids because remember, Baker Mayfield's still inexperienced. You can say, and what, in case anybody doesn't want to go back and watch it, because I don't even know what week that was, but what D'Angelo is saying is the same thing he saw when he was with the Panthers and with the Steelers. Is what you do is you run plays, you run like 3rd and 8, and you say, hey, guess what? Antonio Brown's double covered. Odell Beckham's double covered. You go down these plays. Steve Smith at the time was double covered. So it gets ingrained in Baker's head is I'm not even looking that way because he's double covered. So that's why you didn't see as many targets going to Odell Beckham, despite the fact that he was single covered, even open, because he's a kid who you taught improperly, who doesn't have the experience of Cam Newton, Ben Roethlisberger at the time. So I say all that to say that I think Baker's still the guy. I don't think this is anything more than the fit.
I didn't want to give the impression that I don't think that Baker is the guy. But if Baker did not look good last year. That if we get through 5 games and and this is a completely new regime, and putting Stefanski back with Case Keenum, where they had success in Minnesota, at least if that's the offense that they're bringing in, it makes a lot of sense to bring in Case Keenum, a guy who knows this offense, who can take advantage of it. But if Baker's the reason, and they determine that with this new coaching staff, that he is not a fit for what they're doing, and they're losing because of it, they identify him, 5 games, 6 games, if they're like 1-5, like that's it's curtains for you, Baker. You're done.
I see, and that's what I'm saying. I don't agree. I think this is Case Keenum's familiar, so you don't even have to worry about your backup. Because remember who the backups are? There's Stanton and Gilbert. Like those are some of the worst backups that you could possibly find on an NFL roster. So I think that's all it really is. I think this is, hey, Stefanski does and goes with somebody he knows. He doesn't have to worry about in practice, making sure the backup quarterback is ever prepared in case Baker gets hurt. Unless Baker does get hurt, I don't even care if he's got more interceptions than touchdowns. I think he's out there for the majority, if not the full season. I don't think they're going to Case Keenum. I don't see that as the signing at all. And I'll happily eat crow on your show if it happens.
Is this listen, I like Baker Mayfield, so I want him to succeed. I want the Browns to be good, but it's just they're making all the right signings. It's like when we go back and look at this Hopkins for David Johnson trade. Like it's going to turn out that the Texans won this trade somehow. Just I don't know how that's going to happen, but that's just how the NFL tends to work. The Browns go out, they address a huge need and sign a top-tier offensive lineman. They go and get the best free agent tight end on the market. I don't know why exactly. I guess we can talk about Austin Hooper, but
we can.
They're just going to be, are they just the team who's going to win the offseason every year? When it gets to the field, they're going to just not be good?
Well, here's the thing is like they kind of won last year, but maybe the hype from the year before of, hey, like the team's finally winning games, to all the hype of bringing in all the Beckham and Baker second season and all that type of stuff. let's be honest, like the NFL industry, whether it's real life or fantasy, we got ahead of ourselves, and we got ahead of ourselves in the fact that there were still holes on this team, including the offensive line. And I'm not saying I was right. So look, I said the offensive line was going to be an issue, although I still had the Browns in the playoffs. That's what I'm saying. I still had Baker Mayfield inside my top 10 quarterbacks. I still had Odell Beckham inside my top 5 wide receivers. So I was definitely in the hype. But I also said at the beginning of the time, and a lot of people said this, is that they just traded a strength. Well, that wasn't even like a super strength, but it was above average strength last year for the Odell Beckham, and they didn't really fix it. So if you're talking about the offensive line and they fix it, well, I won't even say it's 100% fixed. It's definitely addressed with the situation that it got so far. And I think that if they add more to it, the Austin Hooper part of it just gives them another option. They didn't have Njoku for essentially the entire season, and they seem to have soured on him. Whether or not they get anybody, I think we've seen before too with Stefanski, is that even if Njoku doesn't go anywhere, they'll use both of them.
What do we think happens to Austin Hooper's fantasy value now? And just the fantasy value. I mean, Beckham, we'll have all offseason to debate that. Landry, it's kind of the same way. They put a tender in a second round tag on Kareem Hunt, so it does look like he's going to come back. So Chubb has to be bumped down just a little bit from like the peak of where we saw him. But Hooper would have been a top 5 tight end on Atlanta. I don't think that he's probably a top 5 tight end anymore.
No, so I'll give you what I tweeted out before. I actually think he could be if they get rid of Njoku.
Yeah, he could be, but like Hayden Hurst just got traded to the Atlanta Falcons from the Baltimore Ravens. So,
let's talk.
Could Hayden Hurst be more valuable in fantasy than Austin Hooper? I think he could.
Only if they get rid of or don't get rid of Njoku. That's what I'm saying. A lot of it's going to hinge on what happens with Njoku, because I just mentioned it about with the fact of what you've seen and what you've seen for Stefanski. But I'll say this. I put this in my article. I'll give you the tweet that I put out from before. So all Browns tight ends last year. Now, Browns tight ends, to go back to it again, to pull that up, is like Ricky Seals-Jones, Demetrius Harris, Steven Carlson, miserable tight ends. So all tight ends last year accounted for 21.7% of the targets. So when Hooper and Ryan were together, because Ryan missed one game with Hooper and then Hooper missed the other games, as everybody knows, 19.8% of the targets. If you talk about yards per attempt, Ryan 7.25, Mayfield 7.17. I say all that to say it's very similar. I'm not saying the increase from 19.7 to 21. He's not going to get all of the tight end targets. I'm just saying there's a similar target share. Despite the differences in the offenses, there's similar yards per attempt with the quarterbacks in a down season for Baker Mayfield. So I think Austin Hooper still should be close, it may be 6th, 7th at worst. I think he's still in the conversation. And as of today, if Njoku leaves some way by a trade, I would still take Hooper over Hayden Hurst. If Njoku doesn't go anywhere, that's when I think we get in that discussion. I am on Hayden Hurst for that reason.
So Kelsey, Kittle, Kelsey, those are your top 2. Andrews is probably close. Maybe Ertz is pretty close. Waller's probably pretty close. That's probably like your top 5-ish. So those are your 2 tiers of your top 5. And then you have Hooper. Maybe Hunter Henry's up in that class too after he was franchised if he comes back healthy. Doesn't it just feel like every time you draft Hunter Henry, you get one good game, and then you're like, oh, God, what's going on with my team?
Talent-wise, the kid's top 5, whether or not he's on the field. I think Hunter Henry is going to end up, when all is said and done, I feel like he's going to be more like the 8th, 9th, 10th tight end off the board because of that risk.
Like I would take Waller 100% over Henry.
Absolutely.
Although I think Henry's a better player.
I'm 100%. I'm with you.
So Evan Ingram, you probably throw into that mix too. But I think that
no,
you don't think so.
Evan Ingram's out of the conversation. He's worse than Hunter Henry. The guy can't stay on the field. The Giants have already talked about
Jake. The new tight ends coach in New York is a former head coach in the NFL, so he's going to get the best coaching.
He's going to get the best. You didn't do it. You should do the voice when you say that. The best coaching. Do it.
The best. He's going to be, there'll be like online segments where, Evan Ingram needs to learn. It's like into the kitchen with Freddie and Evan, and that they're going to figure this out.
You just wrote something for the team. There you go. No, it doesn't matter. The Giants themselves already rumored from one of those guys, Graziano or whoever it might be, was saying that they've already considered him a risk for next year and might bring in another. They just got like Ellison. I think Brett Ellison actually retired because of the concussions. Yeah, so they bring in another that type out there. But watch them trade for Njoku. This the Giants.
So Hooper, Hunt, Greg Olson's in Seattle.
I don't care.
You don't care? No offense.
Did you watch Greg Olson?
I did. I mean, he was good in the broadcasting booth. I'll give him that much. But
He was decent in the broadcasting, but
I thought he was
better
okay
than
for a
Jason
guy
Witten.
who, he was better than Jason Witten, and it's not like he was doing training, like he was playing games and then going in the booth during his bye
That is
week.
fair. He just kind of just like got thrown in there. He should just stayed in the booth, honestly.
Yeah, but unless you're Tony Romo, you're going to make more money playing 50% of the snaps for the Seahawks than you are sitting in the Monday Night Football booth.
Yeah, well, that's the biggest thing is if Will Dissly is healthy, to your point, as you just said, it's probably only going to be like 50%. So, no, I don't care about Greg Olsen.
So, would you say that Austin Hooper, potentially, whether Njoku is there or not, let's just pretend like he's there for the moment, and Hayden Hurst.
Okay.
Do you think that Austin Hooper is closer to Darren Waller for this year, or Hawkinson, Fant, Gesicki, that type of guy?
Yeah, the second half. I would take the latter because to that point, I would take Hayden Hurst. So to go back to him, Hayden Hurst was really actually quite efficient on his 40 targets, caught 30 of them. So we don't ever want to extrapolate, but Hayden Hurst, the biggest thing, and the reason why the Ravens made the mistake of drafting Hurst when they did in the first round ahead of Mark Andrews, partly being a mistake because he's actually older than Austin Hooper by almost a year. But the biggest thing is he's a great blocker. So he's going to be on the field a lot, probably the vast majority of the snaps, and you have him out there in this offense. Again, don't want to extrapolate, but we're talking about 40 targets. If he gave him 80 and he still had the same efficiency, give him 90 and say he's less efficient, so he only doubles his number, 60 receptions, 700 some odd yards, and 5 or 6 touchdowns. Guess what? He's a top 10 tight end.
One more tight end bit of news, and I guess we'll tackle the entire team. Blake Jarwin, 3 years, $24.25 million contract extension with the Dallas Cowboys. Dak was franchised. Not sure exactly what's going on with Cooper so far, so it looks like he's going to stay, or they're going to try to tender him and trade him or something like that.
No, it sounds like they want to have him. Look, they went into this hoping to work something out, and then the tag was the worst case scenario for either one of them. Obviously, the Dak is you can't let him walk, but the all intents was that Cooper wants to be there. They want Cooper there. I think worst case is that Cooper comes back with a contract and they say, all right, this is what we need to match. Worst case is that he comes back with a contract and they say they can't do it. But I think that I don't think Cooper's going to go somewhere and visit and be like, oh, I'm just taking this contract. See you later, Cowboys. I think he does want it for everything that he said, at least if we're going to believe him, because he does want to be there and he does want to be with Dak Prescott. The Blake Jarwin news kind of got glossed over because at that same time was when the Houston Texans trade was going down. I think he's smart. If I tweeted that too about keeper and dynasty leagues, go check on him. And that obviously news is out by now, but this tells you what the team thinks of Jarwin. And he is a good pass catcher. And we've seen the Dak and we've seen what this offense can do, but you do have to consider at the same time at any given day, if Cooper is back, he's going to be the fourth option at best, potentially even worse. So because you're going to Cooper, Gallup, and Zeke. So you're going to be the fourth option.
And you get into a situation, if Randall Cobb comes back, maybe you're even behind Randall Cobb in that pecking order. But we just threw out the sort of back end of who could be the 10th, 11th, 12th tight ends, whether it is that Fant, Hawkinson, Gesicki range, even Hayden Hurst now you throw into that.
Well, you have to remember who's in charge now, too.
But I would rather all of those guys over Blake Jarwin. I'm sorry.
Oh, absolutely.
And Mike McCarthy doesn't throw to tight ends?
He doesn't use them that much. Yeah, we have Jamarca Finley as our one example that everybody just loves to go to time and time again. But as more often than not, I actually think the biggest concern is the player you just said. If they not only bring back Amari Cooper, but they bring back Randall Cobb, now you're running the Packers offense with Randall Cobb as the number 3, which basically means nothing for the tight end.
Tennessee gets a deal worked out with Tannehill. They franchise Derrick Henry, and then they lose Conklin. Is this going to work for another year, or was there a shot last year? Everything worked, or is Tannehill real here? Should we Derrick Henry? We know he's going to be a first round pick in fantasy drafts. He's probably going to be a good first round pick in fantasy drafts. I don't think you're going to get the same guy that you got down the stretch last year, but hey, I didn't think that last year, and it just kept happening. So I am the one with egg on my face about Derrick Henry. Tannehill, if you got Tannehill from the second half last year, you have a top 5 quarterback in fantasy.
Right, but I don't think anybody is expecting that to happen again, and they shouldn't, because the biggest problem about Tannehill is we're talking 2016 Falcons touchdown ratio here. There's no way, just from the history of football. Patrick Mahomes, 2 seasons ago with the 50 touchdowns, he was on that touchdown ratio, not quite of the 2016 Falcons, but all these things is there's a reason these things have barely happened in the NFL history, even in today's NFL, which is so pass heavy. Tannehill throwing for 215 yards a game. Tannehill throwing for as few attempts as he does per game. that ratio just doesn't carry over. So he's going to have regression. And I say he's going to have regression because it's not like the team's going to turn around and like let him loose to throw 40 times a game. They won their 2 playoff games with him throwing for 14, 15, 16 times, completing 89 passes. They actually lost the game with his best passing performance when they got knocked out by the Chiefs. So I say all that to say, like, look, Tannehill's fine in Superflex. Tannehill's fine if you want to draft, like, maybe you want to take a Baker Mayfield for the upside that he could break out. And just in case you say, all right, I'll take Tannehill at the end of the draft, in case Baker Mayfield is what you said, and he just completely falls on his face and he's out, and then you have Tannehill as your safety net. But I think that's where he's going to be. He's going to be a mid QB2, mostly because you just can't throw for 200 yards a game and average 2+ touchdowns per game on top of it. As good as this offense is, it's still a run first. It's still Derrick Henry first, and it's still a touchdown ratio that's not going to carry.
Do you think not having Conklin around is going to be an issue?
I think it's going to be an issue depending on how they address it, but I don't think it's going to be enough that we're all of a sudden scared of this team or scared of Derrick Henry. Conklin, for some, depending on what site you go to, PFF, Football Outsider, where you ever look, he was graded okay in some areas, better in some. There were some that said he wasn't very good at holding up in the pass, or something wasn't very good in the run. That's why I don't like getting caught too. We talk about him on your show plenty. Is like PFF is good, and PFF and Football Outsiders, all these things are good, but they're good as like, hey, let's put a little bit of valuation there, but let's like overreact, because all those numbers that they put out are still based off people like you and me watching the games and coming up with those numbers.
I would hope that the people doing these grades are much smarter than me. If it's people like me, then it's a complete farce.
Fair enough.
If it's people like you, I think we're in pretty good hands. If it's people like me,
it's still better than me.
You might be throwing your money away.
I would still hope they're better than I am in a judging offensive line, and that fact.
Yeah. The other ones I wanted to get to. So we talked about Conklin a little bit. News just broke while we were talking. The Big V goes from the Eagles, signs a $50 million deal with the Lions to shore up their offensive line. And the Dolphins signed your guy, Eric Automatic Flowers.
Automatic hold? Is that what you're going with?
He was like not bad last year.
That's what I was about to say. If you go, there's a perfect example of the grades, and I'm not besmirching the grades by saying this, but there's a perfect example. Is he graded out as one of the better guards because now he's been kicked into guard. And, whether or not that carries over, and he, found success, and that's where he needed to play this entire time, and now he ends up being a top 20 guard. Maybe ? I don't. But the Dolphins have money to spend. The Dolphins have money to spend that even if they miss on this, it's not going to kill them because they've got money to spend for the next couple seasons. They've got an open roster with holes everywhere. So, they're making some nice moves. I think the Shaq Lawson move is a nice and intriguing one too. So, they're making moves. I know that's not for fantasy, but just, hey, look, they're trying to improve this team, and they could, with the money they have and the draft capital that they have, it wouldn't really be any surprise that the Dolphins, maybe not 1 year like the 49ers, but maybe 2 years, get right back into the playoff mix.
No, I think it depends on who they draft at quarterback, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, well, and that's why it might be 2 years if it ends up being Tua.
Yeah, but they were strangely, even though Ryan Fitzpatrick is not great, with the Jets and Bills and a declining Patriots, he could be good enough if your team's good enough.
Well, first, hold on. Ryan Fitzpatrick himself is great. Ryan Fitzpatrick, the football player, isn't necessarily great.
So Big V goes from Philly to Detroit. So Detroit loses Graham Glasgow. He actually just signs with the Denver Broncos. Chris Harris is going to be on the trading block. Everyone kind of wants him, but maybe you can get some more capital out of other teams that way. But kind of like what the Broncos are doing. Do we believe it all in Drew Lock?
I think that is if you listen to John Elway, he does. Look, Drew Lock, if people remember 2 years ago, there was talk of Drew Lock potentially being a number 1 pick, or at least a top 10 pick, the guaranteed first round. So it's these things that change in football real quickly. And that's why when you're watching college, let's chill out with the sophomore players. And, Trevor Lawrence looks like he still might be the number 1 pick next year. But just after you're basing, if he repeats last season, he still might be for projectability, but on play, it might not be. So if you're looking at all these things, I say that with remember some of the post-type sleepers that we usually talk about in fantasy football? Drew Lock might be the college version of a post-type sleeper. Maybe the talent still is. The arm is still there. He's got the measurables when you want to see an NFL quarterback. The decision-making was a question even back with, the sophomore campaign. But, these things can be taught. If you want to teach something, this is why we see athletic players drafted all the time. You can't teach athleticism. You can train up athleticism, but there's always going to be a peak in your body. So if you want to teach something, you want to teach them to be smarter. And sometimes that doesn't work. We've seen it not work a lot. I mean, go to wide receivers is probably the best example all the time with the Darrell Green Beckhams and the Stephen Hills of the world. But if they can be taught, and you have John Elway running that team, if Drew Lock plays smarter, I think he could be Andy Dalton-like.
If he's Andy Dalton-like, the rest of this team kind of looks pretty good.
It does look pretty good, especially when you start with Cortland Sutton and, my Bayshon, but all that still looks like that's going to be a loss. Because for whatever reason, that team, for as much as they want to try and keep giving quarterbacks all these chances, they were so quick to pull the cord and Deshaun. Oh, you dropped the pass. You don't have enough spunk. Get the hell off the team.
They just re-signed Tim Patrick, so watch out.
Oh, watch out for Tim Patrick. I actually do think that the Broncos could end up signing somebody or bringing in somebody through the draft. I mean, this draft class is ridiculously deep, so my Hamilton love might be out the window.
Well, I mean, now that I'm kind of rearranging the pieces in my mind, we don't know. Like, Diggs says he's going to be traded. He doesn't say to who.
Yeah, he's been saying that for the last 2 years.
But if Chris Harris is on his way out anyways, Chris Harris a free agent, or is he still signed? He's still signed, right?
I thought was it tagged, or I thought he was a free agent. Harris? Chris Harris?
He is. I thought he was still under contract. But anyway, if Chris...
Let's find out.
Yeah, you find out for me. So I'm not just talking out my ass to say trade Chris Harris for Stefan Diggs and just go on your way.
I'm just going to go to Spot Track to find out. You can keep talking. I'm going to find out for you.
Chris Harris, British journalist. Not who I'm... Bill showing interest in cornerback, Chris Harris Jr.
No, he is a free agent.
He is a free agent, so that doesn't matter.
Yeah, so you're throwing me off.
Diggs would be, I was just going to say, Diggs would be a very logical point for the Broncos. I just don't know what they give up if it's not Harris. I thought that he would be a good piece because Rhodes is gone. You bring someone in to either play slot corner or try to get him back on the outside. It's the one spot like
it's gonna be a pick if so, because the Vikings are so hard up against the cap that they're just gonna want picks. They're not gonna want players anyway.
Yeah, maybe that's a move. Where do you think Diggs ends up? I mean, people might know by the time that they're watching this, but we don't.
Vikings. I still think he's on the Vikings next year. I think he's going to still. They maneuvered enough already. They're actually on the positive side. They started out negative. The only team I think, as of recording this show, that's still negative is the Steelers, which they got to figure out some things. But according to reports by Caboli, they're going to. But the Vikings got onto the positive side of the cap. It's not a lot of room. I think the last thing I saw was around 14 million. So that doesn't give them a lot of wiggle. But with Stefan Diggs, I still think you're not going to trade him unless you get a hell of a haul back because he's too talented. And if DeAndre Hopkins is going to be the barometer of what you're going to get for a trade for a talented wide receiver, if I'm the Vikings, I don't care that I'm hard up against the cap. There's no way I'm trading Diggs and getting only like what essentially is like a second rounder.
I think if I was the Bills, I would do it.
I mean, if you're the Bills, you should in a heartbeat. I think it's coming from the Vikings side of it. And this is a draft class too, where, I mean, there's going to be wide receivers going in day 3.
Yeah, but you know what? I know Stefan Diggs is good. I do.
Right. But that's what I'm saying is like, I think that's the fight that you're going to have is with giving up picks and everything like that. That's my point.
Let's see here. So
what are you looking at now?
I was just looking at Graham Glasgow. So the Broncos get a new center. That's where we started this one off. Gus Bus re-signs with the Ravens.
Who cares?
That's nice. I like the Gus Bus.
I mean, the second one got me. I think that's really just your kind of late round insurance, especially if you draft Mark Ingram or you just don't draft Mark Ingram, as you won't, and just take Gus Edwards instead.
That's the move. Gus Edwards, better than Mark Ingram. Everyone knows it. People know this, all right? Everyone says Gus Edwards better than that awful Mark Ingram. People say this. Yeah. Everyone says it. Yeah. That's what I hear.
Where did Mark Ingram finish last year? 7th? 8th?
You know what? I recall winning fantasy championships and him not being on my team. Because you know why? Because my team wasn't hexed.
Well, to your point, wasn't Mark Ingram basically gone for the final 2 weeks of value anyway?
I don't remember. I remember Derrick Henry didn't play week 16 or week 15, whatever it was.
No, that's what it was, the opposite. So Mark Ingram did nothing in 13 and 14, but came up big in 15 or 16. Yeah, he's basically the antithesis of what Henry was at the end.
Let's circle back to the follow because we didn't really touch on it from like the Hopkins and Hopkins. Okay, Hopkins leaves the Texans. What did they look like at receiver? Because everyone's just like, Will Fuller's going to be great. Sure about that?
No. This is not 100%, this is not the starting lineup for the wide receivers in Houston from day one of the NFL season either. So there's reports also that they might want to take that pick and turn it into more picks because they're still lacking so many. But point being is, you talk about this draft for wide receivers. They're drafting somebody. I wouldn't be surprised. It would be a really funny move if they somehow signed Amari Cooper. But, maybe they go out there and sign a different wide receiver, maybe Emmanuel Sanders, whatever. My point is, Kenny Stills and Will Fuller are not going to be 1 and 2 for the Texans week 1 of the NFL season. There's going to be somebody else in there that's going to leapfrog them or at least be the number 2. And Stills, really, Will Fuller, when's the last time you can count on him for a full? If I told you Will Fuller versus AJ Green, who plays more games, I'd still take AJ Green.
We'll get to AJ Green in a second. On the Cardinals side, who's better, Kirk or Fitz?
Kirk.
I think so, too.
Definitely. Here's the thing. Both of them had almost
that is going to be a very frustrating group of guys to draft, though.
I think on week-to-week basis, absolutely. But Kirk can play outside, as we know. Kirk can also play the slot. A lot of people thought when he came out of college, that's all he could do. And that's why a lot of people thought his value was buried because he was going to be playing behind Larry Fitzgerald in that big slot position. But if you look at last year, the targets were almost identical. And where did Kirk finish? Much ahead of Larry Fitzgerald, even with a down, like I said, he was banged up for a lot of the season. It wasn't a great year for him. It wasn't the breakout everybody expected. Now, the 108 targets he saw, I don't think he sees more this season, maybe 5 more, 10 more, because Hopkins is now there. But still, as 108 targets, he still finishes as wide receiver 37 in fantasy points per game, wide receiver 40 overall. I think it's a good spot for him. I think with Larry Fitzgerald, where he finished last year as wide receiver 5, is where he deserves to be as well. But the crutch argument, as I hate, that is better in best ball. But in this case, this is the truth. Is Christian Kirk, great wide receiver 4 for your team if you can get him there. But the inconsistency is going to make him better in best ball than trying to figure out seasonal, because I agree with you, week to week, 1 week might be Fitzgerald, 2 weeks might be Kirk, but there's not going to be consistency.
I'd be curious to know how much of Kirk's actual overall fantasy points came in that one game against Tampa Bay. I believe he scored his only 3 touchdowns of the year in that game.
I think it was 45-ish%. Here, I'll do the quick math for you. How about that?
Let's have it, right? Live. This is why you could work for PFF and I couldn't.
So 34.8 fantasy points in that game. It was, I way overshot. It was only 26.5%.
Still, that's over a fourth of his fantasy points.
Yeah.
The guy played, I think he played 15 of the 16 games.
Yeah, what I was going back to, what was in my mind, it was Will Fuller's 2 games accounted for 50% of his season almost.
Now, in fairness, he only played 5 games, so that's not the craziest thing in the world.
He played more than that, but yeah.
AJ Green was franchised by the Cincinnati Bengals. It looks like they're getting rid of Dalton. Joe Burrow is going to come in. How do you approach AJ Green this year? Because I'm actually kind of happy that he continued to sit out because he got a full year to recover. That can only be good for you.
It could only be good, but at the same time, this is a long time with not seeing AJ Green play football. So that's a concern. The fact of how little football he played even before this injury, because he's always banged up and always getting hurt. AJ Green talent. This is actually, you know what? He's not too dissimilar from David Johnson. Talent-wise, AJ Green's anywhere near 100%. He has the talent to be a top 5 wide receiver, no matter who the quarterback is. If it is Joe Burrow, which it will be. But this point being, even as a rookie quarterback, AJ Green, who he is now, I think is a giant question. And is he 90% of what he used to be? He's 95. Is he 80%? Does he look like David Johnson and he's just slow now? I think you put in the same point is I think he's going to go before this point, but a wide receiver 3 is where I would put him because the upside is top 15 wide receiver. I think essentially it's David Johnson of wide receivers.
Non-fantasy stuff, 2 trades were made. The Colts shipped off their number 13th overall pick and got DeForest Buckner, the Forrest Buckner, if you don't speak French. And Calais Campbell goes to the Ravens from the Jags. Which one of these do you think is the better deal?
Do we get to include the Ravens trading the Hayden Hurst thing too? Because the Ravens just walked away with this day.
Yeah, so what ended up being the total damage here? What did they give up for Campbell? They gave up a 4th or something?
Yeah, which was essentially a pick that they got back anyway from another deal. So they didn't really give up a whole lot for that anyway. And then they got a 2nd and a 5th for, was it a 2nd? What was the Hayden Hurst? It was 2nd and 5th, right?
Was this? Yeah, it was a 2nd and 5th.
Yeah, so it was almost essentially the same close to the trade for DeAndre Hopkins for a freaking tight end who hasn't really done much.
Hey, he was a first-round pick. He got drafted ahead of Lamar Jackson.
Hey, Ravens front. I tweeted this earlier. Ravens front office better than your favorite team's front office because even when they make a mistake, they come out roses when they make up for the mistake.
Well, yeah, the one thing that I know that Newsom's not there anymore, but at least seems to have the seeds of, they're growing out of the seed. It's like when Groot ended up being real little again, then there was baby Groot. That's basically what the Ravens front office has become. But they're very good at acknowledging internally when they have made a mistake and adjusting on the fly. Like most front offices just go down with the ship.
Yeah, well, this is a good look. This is a learning experience for fantasy owners. We talk about that every year. Don't get so hung up. You made a mistake in the draft. You made a bad trade or whatever. Stop hanging on to these guys till week 7. Like, sometimes you cut bait, move on, get something out of a trade. If you can get something before you get nothing, and you have to cut them anyway. So I think the Ravens are doing it right. The Ravens have always done it right.
Are you surprised that, and maybe it's a cost type of thing, but were you surprised that the Niners decided to keep Eric Armstead over DeForest Buckner?
Not when the contract came out for Buckner ended up at $21 million a year, right? So
yeah, and Armstead was 5 years, $85 million.
Right. So, between the two, if you look at it, the cost was there. The player versus player, obviously, I think everybody, I don't think there would be one person out there that would say take Armstead over Buckner. But when you're talking about the cost, you're talking about the 49ers, they got some contracts that you got to think long-term, not necessarily this year, but next year, the year after that. I think it's just the long-term outlook of them saying, we're not going to tie ourselves into 21, especially when we have Armstead anyway. They had to keep one or the other. They just kept the less expensive one.
So let's close this out because we don't know the rest of the signings right now. I'm still just checking up on Twitter to make sure nothing else is breaking. I think the last thing that actually happened was the Glasgow signing to the Broncos. Yeah, Big V to the Lions, Glasgow to the Broncos. Bring in a guard, switch out to center. And that's how we're going to go. QB landing spots. I'm going to name a team, and you tell me who their starting quarterback is going to be in week 1 of the NFL season. Now, week 1 of the next NFL season, that could be 2020, that could be 2029, for all we know at this point. Let's just pretend it's going to be in September. Who is the Indianapolis Colts starting quarterback?
Phil Rivers.
I'm starting to think that's going to be the case, too.
Hey, by the way, this probably was the tweet that made me laugh the most today. Was when they announced the fact that Trump said gatherings of 10 or more, and somebody's, oh, hi, Barkley. So when they said Trump said gatherings of 10 or more, and somebody said Rivers is going to have to get rid of one of his kids.
It looks like Barkley wants to join the family now.
I saw that.
So I'll let you take Barkley out here in a second.
No, you're fine. You're fine. She's just waking up. It's not. We're not in a super rush.
I like that your dog has the same sleeping schedule as my 1-year-old kid. Feed him, put him down for a 1-hour nap. When they wake up, you gotta take him for a pee.
Oh, wait, is he already 1?
He's 14 months as of today.
Wow.
Yeah,
that went by so fast.
I know, man. It's crazy. He's got teeth. Now he has more teeth coming. He's freaking out the entire time. Childcare is canceled, so I spend my mornings taking care of him. And I already had a 5-head on the go, and it's turned into a 6-head real quickly. It's been 24 hours. I don't know how I'm going to get through this.
Yeah, somebody tweeted that earlier today too. They said for all the people that talk about, homeschooling your kids, I've been doing it for 2 days, and teachers should be paid $1 million a year.
Yeah, listen, I have a 14-month-year-old. We pay a nice penny to put them in childcare, and I'm willing to pay that money. Even if I have to go into debt to pay it, I'm willing to pay it. So you say Rivers to the Colts. I kind of agree with you. But the funniest thing that was on social media was the guy in Philly walking around in the Nelson Aguilar jersey saying he can't catch coronavirus because he's Nelson Aguilar.
Yeah, see, I saw that, and the reason it didn't land for me is because I heard the joke about a week ago. I'm not saying, "Ooh, look at me," but somebody, I forget.
Jake, you gotta be. It's the first time I saw it. I fucking laughed my ass off.
No,
I need some laughs. All right.
I'm with you. That's why I gave you the Philip Rivers one. I'm just saying, one of my buddies, I forget who it was, sent me one, and it was a tweet saying that hey, become an Eagles fan or become an Eagles wide receiver or something like that, because then you won't catch the coronavirus. So I had already kind of seen something similar.
Tampa Bay Buccaneers starting quarterback.
Winston.
I'm going to say Teddy Bridgewater.
I actually think that the Bears pulled out on that, but I don't think that Bridgewater is. I can see it though. Actually, I say the Buccaneers because I'm telling you, I still believe this Tom Brady thing is full of crap, just like Dwayne Wade's first time through free agency when he was just messing with other teams to get information. You tell me Patriots aren't sitting back, not really making any moves so far, and Brady's going to get all this information. Be like, yeah, this is kind of what we should do. Brady and I'm going to say Brady with the Patriots, Winston back with the Buccaneers, but the Bridgewater one wouldn't surprise me.
I think that Jameis is going to go to the Chargers.
You do think so?
I do, yeah.
I love that for fantasy purposes.
Me too. And I like it for the Chargers. Like, they just replaced Phillip Rivers with younger Phillip Rivers.
Well, there's also talk about the whole Tyrod Taylor all right, settle down. Holy crap. with the Chargers to talk about they're happy. Now it's obviously probably coach speak, but Anthony Lynn, when he was at the combine and I was standing right next to him. I was actually going to ask the same question. It's like, hey, I'm happy with Tyrod Taylor. I think he looks better than Tyrod. Oh my God, she's hyper today. With Anthony Lynn that he likes Tyrod Taylor and thinks he's better than he was in 2016. So whether they do that and then draft Justin Herbert, see what I did there. Yeah, I think that could be a route, but I would love for fantasy. I would love that for fantasy purposes.
All right, Jake, I'll let you get Barkley outside. So
no, she needs to learn. She needs to learn.
She needs to learn that she needs to go pee. You don't want her peeing all over your nice fancy equipment here. We have tons of time to talk football. I'm sure. So we've gone through everything that's happened on day one of free agency. Day two, I'm sure it's going to have a lot in store because there's a lot of names floating out there. Could be more deals on the way. Let everyone know what you got going on at The Athletic in terms of a free agent tracker.
Yes, and that's actually just all it is. Look, a free agent tracker. Barkley here with me as I update live as the skill positions I'm updating, and if there are any more trades. And then, my podcast, obviously over at The Athletic, the throwback. Oh, wow. I forgot to schedule somebody for All in Sports. I don't know if I'll have the podcast this week, but yeah, the free agency tracker will be over there at The Athletic.
All right. You can follow Jake on Twitter and Instagram at AllInKid. You can follow me on both, plus the Facebooks at the PME, THEPME. To get in the draw for 20 DK bucks, smashy, the like button. Leave your DraftKings handle in the comment section and tell me where you would rank David Johnson amongst running backs heading into the 2020 fantasy football season. You want to get into a draw for 100 DraftKings dollars? Subscribe to the Pat Mayo Experience audio podcast. Leave a 5-star review. DraftKings handle. It's something you like about the show. And boom, you're in that draw. Also, if you tell a friend, sure, you're in a draw for DK bucks too. I don't know how I can verify that, but please go out and tell some friends. We got football. We'll have baseball on the way. If this Gage Warriors things actually happen, we'll figure out a way to try to bet on that. Movie stuff, cuss corners, it's all out. Go back on the feed. We have a lot of evergreen content, meaning stuff that, even though it came out a week ago, it has no shelf life. You can go back and listen to it. So check out the Pat Mayo Experience audio and video feed. All right? I'm Pat Mayo. Stay safe. I'll see you next time.
Pat Mayo Experience! Experience!